Thanks for staying with us. Let's now go back to this breaking news. And there has been a car ramming attack in the West Bank. And joining me here in the studio is our defence correspondent, Daniel Semach, and our diplomatic correspondent, Ellie Hockenberg. Daniel, I'll start with you. What more do we know about this breaking news?
Well, now we have some more information from the hospitals where the two injured were brought to after this car ramming incident within the West Bank. We're talking about one individual around the age of 20 who is suffering from moderate injuries, and another who is suffering from serious injuries around age 18, 19. We don't have a clear message as to whether or not this individual is indeed 18 or 19, but in any case, one seriously wounded who is actually unconscious at the scene, and both are now undergoing emergency care in local hospitals there near the area of El Azhar where this took place, just outside of the El Azhar community within the Etzion block within the West Bank. We understand that the driver of the vehicle that struck those two individuals was shot and killed at the scene.
Okay, tell me, Daniel, a little bit more about this area in the West Bank there.
Well, we're talking about an area that isn't necessarily unfamiliar with violent incidents such as this one, whether it be car ramming attacks, stabbing attacks. And we're talking about as recently as just over a week ago, there was a stabbing not too far away. The Gush Etzion Junction sits in between these two areas of El Azhar as well as Migdal Oz. And that Migdal Oz is where indeed the stabbing took place just over a week ago. And afterwards, there was a manhunt after the perpetrator of that attack. Obviously, here we're not talking about a manhunt that's underway, but we are talking about an area that has been experiencing an escalation in tension, at least if we're talking about the last week or so, bringing more Israeli security forces, bringing a battalion to the area immediately after that stabbing attack. For now, it does seem as though this situation is under control, but obviously we'll get a lot more details about the progress of the medical treatment that they're undergoing right now.
We will. Daniel, Ellie, stay with me. Let's go now to our correspondent, Yoav Borowitz, who is on the way to the scene there of this car ramming attack. Yoav is on the phone. Yoav, thank you for joining me. What more can you tell us? What are you hearing?
Well, we're hearing, first of all, here in the West Bank, we're experiencing some traffic jams, a lot of cars, enhanced Israeli security forces in the area. Obviously, those security forces were not able to prevent this horrific ramming attack that took place just a short while ago. We know that the Israeli teen is on life support. He suffers from serious head injuries. The other girl, the 19-year-old woman, is moderately wounded. As Daniel mentioned before, just about over a week ago, an Israeli teen was murdered in Migdal Oz, very, very close to where the ramming attack took place today. And we already hear from security forces here at this scene that they are seriously concerned from a terror wave. Also, yesterday in Jerusalem, two teens, Palestinian teens, attacking Israeli soldiers, trying to stab them. One of the teens was killed. So we are experiencing a recent terror wave, and we will be here throughout the day in the West Bank to cover all developments, obviously.
And Yoav, tell me, what more do we know about this person who was behind the wheel of the vehicle?
The thing we know now is that the car was with Israeli license plates. Now, this is something that is somewhat surprising because most of the terror attacks are taking place with Palestinian cars with white license plates, but this car had a yellow license plate. We still don't know if the assailant was an Israeli or a Palestinian, so this is what we know for now, Sarah.
Right, Yoav, thank you for that. We'll come back to you a little later on. And Daniel, tell me, just how concerning is this for Israeli security forces that there really does seem to be somewhat of an uptick of violence over the last couple of weeks in that area?
Definitely a point of concern. As Yoav mentioned, also an attack in nearby Jerusalem, not too far from this area of the West Bank. But important, just to bring the latest now, the Israeli military is coming out officially stating that this was a terror attack. They say that a driver indeed struck two citizens, Israeli citizens, from what we understand, in the right outside the El Azhar community. And indeed, as we know, those two individuals are undergoing emergency care. One of them emergency care, the other one is dealing with the first sort of initial treatment in a local hospital. So definitely a point of concern, especially when we're talking about the close proximity in space, in physical space, geographically, but also in regards to the fact that we're looking at 3 attacks within this region in just around a week's time. So we oftentimes see these sort of incidents maybe repeating themselves. Copycat attacks is something that the Israeli defense establishment is constantly looking out for. We don't know if that will be the case here, but it's definitely something that's certainly on the minds of the Israeli defense establishment.
Let's bring that picture of the car up again, Daniel. Tell me, we have a new picture that we are seeing now. Tell me, what is the protocol of Israeli security when they come across, when an incident like this, such as this, is called in?
Well, this is a really important picture, I think, because it actually tells us a great deal. We're looking at the different forces that are there, talking about first responders, Israel's Magen David Adom, as well as we know that there were also volunteer medics that were at the scene. We're also looking at, obviously, IDF troops that are in the area. IDF troops are constantly under patrol in these areas because, as we said earlier, these are areas that are definitely prone to these sort of terror incidents and violence between Palestinians and Israelis. Here we're talking about a major road that obviously was very close to a bus stop, as we saw in a previous image. Here, obviously, the traffic that ensues. Oftentimes you see roadblocks after terror attacks like this one, roadblocks that can lead to a traffic jam that could spread deeper into the West Bank, which just sort of escalates the tension at least. It doesn't necessarily mean anything's going to happen, but the inconvenience for many could, lead to further frustrations. We have seen that firsthand after terror attacks take place, the sort of tension that continues hours after the fact, especially if we're talking about an area that's near a central junction. Here we're talking about the Elazar community, close to the more central junction of Gush Etzion, and so it's possible that we'll be seeing more IDF troops patrolling that area just because of what happened earlier in the day.
Which certainly can cause more friction there. And let's bring in our diplomatic correspondent, Ellie Hockenberg. Ellie, we are, of course, heading toward the second round of elections for this year, September 17. And as you know, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is known as Mr. Security. But how do these sort of incidents look so close to an election for him?
Well, it's not a rare occurrence at all to have an uptick in violence, let it be in the West Bank or on Israel's southern border with the Gaza Strip during campaign season. We've seen an uptick in tensions vis-a-vis Hamas in the Gaza Strip in the previous elections or leading up to the April elections, and now we're seeing the West Bank experiencing similar uptick to a certain extent. Security is a main motif, and we're talking about Israeli politics time and time again. Israelis, when asked what's the most important topic for them when they're heading to the ballots, are answering security. And with that said, Netanyahu continues to maintain his image as Mr. Security, as you said. This despite the fact that his main challenger, the Blue and White Party, is led by 3 ex-generals that were trying to make political gains on the security related topics or in the security arena, but still Netanyahu is able to maintain his strong position in that sense, and security or Netanyahu's security perception is not being challenged so much by his political opponents, even in this second election season ahead of the September election.
And Ellie, usually after these sort of incidents, we do see the Prime Minister coming out making statements such as that parts of the West Bank, more of the West Bank, will be annexed. Can we expect that?
Yes, so we do hear such statements from hawkish politicians in the aftermath of such incidents. This is all very fresh, just taking place. So I assume that before Shabbat, a Jewish holy day of rest, will enter in a few hours. We'll hear from Israeli politicians, the Prime Minister and Defense Minister Benjamin Netanyahu included.
All right, we are about to go out for a short break, but briefly, Daniel, any updates now over the last few minutes?
Well, again, the IDF now officially confirming that this was a terrorist incident, because partially also important to mention here, we're not talking about IDF troops that were targeted here. We are talking about civilians that were targeted very close to a bus stop outside of the community of Elazar, and they also confirmed the fact that the perpetrator of this attack was shot at the scene, and that more IDF troops have been brought to the area as a result.
All right, Ellie, Daniel, thanks so much. Stay with me, and we are going out for a short break, but when we come back, we'll bring you all of the latest on this breaking news as Israeli security declares a car ramming attack in the West Bank as a terrorist attack, and we are seeing pictures coming in there from the scene. Stay with us.
you need to know, the news, fast and to the point, and the in-depth interviews that will keep you in your seat from the people that you trust. I-24 News presents The New Rundown, co-hosted by Nurit Ben and Kalev Ben David, only on I-24 News.
The Middle East. I-24 News is a witness. Our journalists live and breathe there every day. Get all the latest global news from our studios in Tel Aviv, New York, Washington, and Paris. Anytime, anywhere. Download the I-24 News app, available on Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple, and Google stores. I-24 News, see beyond.
Americans have simply lost trust in news media.
What happened to the news? All I get is a daily serving of lies.
Do your job and just tell me
I am overloaded with news that is useless.
Give me the facts. Let me sort it.
Where's the integrity?
Why is the news so biased? I will never trust the media.
Unflinching, outspoken, and to the point. The most complete coverage of the day's events. Weeknights, watch Crossroads for analysis, interviews, and reporting that connects us to the Middle East and the world. Watch Crossroads, 6 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Thanks for staying with us. Let's now go back to our breaking news story. And there has been a car ramming attack in the Etzion block in the West Bank. And our correspondent, Yoav Borowitz, is on the phone. He is on the way to the scene there. You can see the area coming up on a map. And Yoav, tell me, what more do you know about this?
Well, Sarah, we know that the car of the assailant was an Israeli license plate car with a yellow license plate. It wasn't a Palestinian car. We still don't have the information whether the assailant was a Palestinian or an Israeli. We know that two Israeli teens were seriously injured. One is critically injured with head injuries. Both are in the Jerusalem hospital. The woman is in trauma department, and the man, this 18-year-old teen, is on life support with head injuries, as mentioned, critically wounded. This is what we know from now. We also hear from security forces at the area that they are extremely concerned from a terror attack wave, because we've witnessed 3 attacks within the last 8 or 9 days. Some of them are copycat attacks. And this is what's happening now in the West Bank, close to the El-Azhar community, where the ramming attack took place just a short while ago, Sarah.
And Yoav, we are seeing pictures coming in, authorities covering the road there, the road blocked off, and a number of emergency services gathering there at the scene. Tell me, what is this area where this attack took place? Tell me what the landscape is like and what is around that area.
Well, this area is relatively heavily populated by Jewish settlers in those communities, whether we're talking Efrat or we're talking El-Azhar community or the Migdal Oz kibbutz, where 9 days ago, Zvir Sorek, a young Israeli teen, was murdered in a stabbing attack. So we're talking an area that is relatively, of course, densely populated by Jews, but also by Arabs. A lot of Arab communities in the area. Therefore, this is considered to be a dangerous area. Last weekend, there were just so many security forces here at the ground, all with their assault rifles being ready to shoot at any given moment. This is while the manhunt still continued for the killers of Zvir Sorek, but those killers were found about 48 hours after the murder. But now we're dealing with the new attack that happened less than an hour ago. Again, we see an enhanced presence of Israeli security forces. which, of course, they can prevent some attacks, but they cannot prevent all attacks. When some of those attacks are really self-initiated, they're not done by specific organizations. They're usually done by young Palestinians. Although we don't even know about today's specific attack, whether a Palestinian carried it, I'm sure we'll get this information very soon. But it's just very, very difficult for Israeli security forces to prevent all of the attacks that's been going on within the last few days and the last few weeks.
Yoav Borowitz on the phone there. Thanks so much. And let's bring in Ellie Hockenberg. Ellie, I understand we are already hearing some reactions from the political spectrum here.
Right, Sarah, only a few minutes ago, you've mentioned that we often hear calls to underline the settlement enterprise and the aftermath of such incidents. And this is exactly what we're hearing from the leaders of the settlement movement. Shlomo Ne'eman, the head of the Etzion Bloc Regional Council, is saying that unfortunately we're experiencing days in which we're seeing lack of deterrence that is the trigger to the attacks that we're seeing in the Etzion Bloc and in the greater West Bank as a whole. We're demanding the government to see actions that will bring to the end of all question marks on the future of this region, Israeli sovereignty, and promoting massive settlement in those areas. This will be the right answers to those terrorists. Shlomo Ne'eman, the head of the Etzion Bloc Regional Council, is saying one clear statement: there's no chance for you and there's no future for you. Again, this is what he claims to be the end result of Israeli sovereignty, full Israeli sovereignty over this area. We're also hearing the heads of the Yesha Council, the settlement organization, the main settlement organization, with a similar call to the government to act, and they are connecting it also to the attacks that we've seen in the Temple Mount. Only yesterday, saying that there's a very clear deterioration of the security situation, of course, reinforcing or strengthening the security forces on the ground. But as you've mentioned, Sarah, the political impact or ramifications of such an attack are clear. The hawkish elements or right-wing elements are demanding a clearer stance of the government in this respect.
And Daniel, I understand you have now another reaction from the police spokesperson.
Yeah, the police now actually giving us more details on how the perpetrator of this attack was neutralized. Apparently, a off-duty police officer who had just finished his shift from the nearby Hebron region was on his way away from that area, witnessed the actual car ramming itself, said that he saw the car hit two civilians, and then that the perpetrator of the attack tried to exit the vehicle, and that is when this Israeli police officer opened fire, indeed shot the attacker. When we understand that attacker has also been killed, also more police units and Israeli military forces have been brought.
Certainly a strong Israeli presence there on the ground. Daniel, and tell me, is there really any way of somewhat preventing these sort of attacks?
Preventing them is difficult. Preventing them is really just the product of a good intelligence gathering and being able to identify if somebody is planning such an attack. But the issue with car rammings is that they can be fairly spontaneous. You can get in a car and then decide you want to execute this sort of attack. Now, there are certain defensive measures that the Israeli defense establishment uses in order to prevent the damage that can be done. Part of that has to do with putting up cement blocks near bus stops. And if we actually look here, we see a scene of where this took place. Along roads like this, if you're going to look at a bus stop, here's a bus stop right there, you don't see a cement block, but at times we're talking about very massive cement blocks that are several feet by several feet large, that are meant to try and prevent a car from hitting people that are waiting at a bus stop. There, as we saw earlier, the vehicle that was used in this attack was flipped over right behind the bus stop itself. But definitely that's a measure that the Israeli defense establishment has decided to use to be better safe than sorry, putting these massive cement blocks near places where people are either waiting for buses or even hitchhiking, something that's very common within the West Bank. In this situation, though, it doesn't seem like the civilians were standing in an area area that had such a block, as we can see there in that photo. The car is very close to a bus stop. It's likely that those those civilians were actually standing very nearby.
And Daniel, this of course comes on the back of another incident which happened yesterday around 6 o'clock in the old city of Jerusalem, where we did see these dramatic pictures coming in of these two 14-year-old boys running inside an area where there were Israeli security forces standing before, lunging at them with a knife, and these two children, these 14-year-olds, were then shot. We are seeing the pictures coming in now, shot by these forces. One of them killed another in a critical condition in hospital. Tell me, what sort of coordination is there regarding these sort of incidents between Israeli officials and security personnel from the Palestinian Authority?
Well, it depends what area we're talking about. Here, within the old city of Jerusalem, we're talking about what was really an Israeli police sort of operation. Actually, the individual who was stabbed, the Israeli police officer that was stabbed, was, as the Israeli police put it, in the middle of an operational activity. That probably here means security protocol that is constantly underway within the old city of Jerusalem and elsewhere near the old city and near East Jerusalem. So in this case, when we're talking about in the old city, this is mainly an Israeli police sort of jurisdiction, as well as the border police. When we're talking about the West Bank, though, there is certainly more security coordination between the Palestinian security forces and Israeli security forces. In an incident such as the one we saw today, when there isn't necessarily an ongoing manhunt, the Israeli forces are generally the first responders there and taking care of the situation. Certainly we're talking about medical treatment, as they have been rushed to Israeli hospitals. But when you're talking about a manhunt, which we saw just over a week ago, that is something that's widely believed to be a joint operation, and in that it's a joint operation for the Israeli security forces, and also there is security coordination with the Palestinian security forces.
And so, Daniel, three different types of attacks in around 2 weeks. Tell me, how concerning is it that these may, spur on copycat attacks?
That's definitely a concern. It's always a concern when you see such violent incidents taking place, especially in an area that is more susceptible to this sort of violence, in an area where it does seem that like an attack like the one we saw today could sort of encourage someone else to sort of engage in a similar sort of activity. And that's what the Israeli defense establishment prepares for. Whether or not there is concern of another attack imminently, that we cannot say, that we can't speculate. But what we can say is that we already know more forces are being brought to the area, given the violent incident that took place today within the West Bank. And a similar situation obviously took place over a week ago when there was a stabbing in the nearby, outside the nearby community of Migdalos.
And Ellie, tell me, how much do these sort of incidents impact on an election campaign with Benjamin Netanyahu seeking re-election in September? Well,
Sarah, definitely is. It has great impact on the political system as a whole. We've seen different uptick in violence ahead of the April elections. That time it was on Israel's southern communities, the border with the Hamas-ruled Gaza Strip. Now we're seeing the West Bank experiencing an uptick in violence, and we're often hearing reactions throughout the political spectrum. This is, of course, a fresh event, so I assume that in the coming hours we will hear more. But every side of the political map is trying to capitalize on such events to rally support. But with that said, Sarah, even though Netanyahu's main political opponents are 3 ex-generals and were speculated to play the security card quite heavily, Netanyahu still able to maintain his image as a Mr. Security, as you dubbed him earlier in the broadcast, and the Blue and White Party, again led by 3 former IDF chiefs of staff, are failing to challenge his security perception, let it be in the West Bank or in the Gaza Strip.
All right, Ellie, thank you. Let's finally go back to our correspondent, Yoav Borowitz, who is about to arrive there at the scene. Yoav is on the phone. What more can you tell us, Yoav?
Well, what we know now, Sarah, is that the assailant was killed. He was shot to death by a police officer who just finished his shift. He was driving near the bus stop where the ramming attack took place. He went out of his car and he shot the assailant who tried to run away. We also know that the assailant was driving an Israeli licensed car, and it was not a Palestinian car, but rather an Israeli car. We still do not know whether the assailant was a Palestinian or Israeli. but he was shot to death moments after running over 2 Israeli teens, critically wounding one and seriously wounding the other.
Yoav Borowitz, thank you so much. And I'll just lastly bring Daniel Semak back in. Daniel, I see we are hearing a response from Hamas. Tell me, what does that group have to say?
Yeah, we heard from a spokesperson of Hamas, indeed, as Ellie said, the ruling entity in the Gaza Strip, that they're blessing this attack and saying that it's a valid response to the Israeli crimes that were being conducted in Al-Aqsa. They are referring to the Temple Mount compound and the violence that we've seen there, not only yesterday with that stabbing attack that took place in the old city of Jerusalem, but also earlier this week when there were violent clashes on the Temple Mount compound itself between Israeli security forces, Muslim worshippers, and Jewish worshippers, who were also, both of these denominations were commemorating major holidays. So we're hearing from Hamas indeed praising this attack.
All right, Daniel Semak and Ellie Hockenberg, thank you so much. And we are nearly out of time, but Jeff Smith will be in very shortly to bring you more information on this breaking news story with a car ramming attack in the Etzion block in the West Bank, with the assailant killed and 2 others critically injured. Thanks for watching.